everybody, it's Gina and welcome to the Library Mouse, where we talk about books and reading and many other things. And there's always a cat or two or three and a dog showing up in a video. Today I want to talk about my favorite genre, and that is historical fiction. I have lately not been having great reading experiences. The books that I've been reading just are not resonating with me. Some of them I'm reading because I feel like I need to. Others I've DNF'd, and it made me want to go back to some of my old tried and trues. So some of these historical fiction books are a little more obscure. Maybe you have not heard of them. Maybe you are in the same boat, and these are just some new ideas for some books. So let's get started on some historical fiction. So I have loved historical fiction ever since I was a child. So even though the books that, like Little Women, The Secret Garden, The Little Princess, those books weren't considered historical fiction at the time they were written. When I was reading them, they were definitely historical in nature, and all I wanted to do was to live back in the old days. I loved stories about pioneer times. I loved anything that had to do with what life used to be like, and I still feel like the same way about that. The first book I wanted to share is probably one of the first historical fiction books as a young adult, maybe 20, around 19, 20. I read it over and over and over and over again in the 80s and 90s. And to be honest, I don't even know where my book went. I think it fell apart. And that is the book, The Midwife. It is written by Gay Courter, and it was published in 1981. So this is almost what I would call a historical fiction soap opera-ish kind of book. It lended itself to that plot, I suppose. It is very good. I just loved it so much. It follows a woman named Hannah. She's a young midwife, and she lives in Russia, and she She delivers babies for everyone from Russian noblemen or noble women to prostitutes. And this is her passion. But she decides, after surviving the pogroms there, she immigrates to America, where she begins to set up her own midwifery practice. I think in New York City, I think. But this was a time period when midwives were challenging doctors who were going into this emerging field of obstetrics. And, you know, she's trying to get her midwife practice going, but there's also three men who want to make her their own, and it is a Russian doctor, a socialist, and what was the other one? Oh, a ruthless, vile businessman. It had just enough of that little drama, but I loved how strong she was. I loved that in the face of adversity, she was still going after what she wanted. It was a good book. So if you want something along those lines, lightish kind of reading, check out The Midwife by Gay Courter. So the next book is a totally different change of pace. It is a book that when I was finished, I just couldn't stop recommending it to people. And I realized I really haven't talked about it here on this channel. and that is the coming of age story titled Mary Jane. It is by Jessica Anya Blau, and it was published in 2021. And there were two things that intrigued me first about this book. It's set in 1970s Baltimore, and my mother grew up in Baltimore. I've heard stories about Baltimore my entire life. The other fact was that while this girl's a little older than me, in the 70s, I hadn't quite hit, I was just hitting 14, and she's 14 years old, and she comes from a very conservative family who go to church. They're very focused on appearances and what people think of them. She's a good girl, shy, quiet, bookworm. I felt that connection with her also. So she decides that she's going to be a nanny for the summer for this neighborhood doctor. And her mother thinks that's great because it's a doctor. And then once she begins nannying, she discovers that while the outside of the house looks great, the inside is chaos. Nobody cooks meals, nobody cleans, nobody watches the child. And so she goes in and she imparts those ideals into this family. She kind of starts putting them on a schedule and cleaning up their messy house and making sure that they're eating right. So she's affecting them, but at the same time, she realizes this doctor is a psychiatrist, and he has opened his home for the summer to one client, and it is a famous rock star who is an addict, and he's coming there to dry out. And so while she is helping them, they're also introducing her to a totally different lifestyle: sex, drugs, rock and roll, everything you could think of. She learns from this crew at this house, and she begins to question the way she was brought up, what's right, what's wrong, the way people are judged for what they wear, what they dress, or what they wear, how they dress, the way that they look. It's such a good coming of age story. And she's trying to figure out what path she might go down in the future. So if that sounds good, it is by a Jessica Anya Blau, and the title is Mary Jane. So another book set in a different time period is The Wives of Henry Oades, and it is by Johanna Moran. Sorry about that. And it was published in 2010. So I really liked this book. It was definitely a different kind of plot. It was based on a real story. So Henry Oades accepts this accountancy post, and he moves his wife and daughters to New Zealand, which is kind of wild at the time period. He's an adventurer. His wife Margaret is not. She is not happy that they're moving to New Zealand. It's much rougher and more rustic than they thought. And then during an uprising of some natives, his wife and children are kidnapped while he is not home. He spends months looking for them. He cannot find them. He decides that they're probably dead. He's grief-stricken. He moves back to the United States, and he moves to California. And there he remarries this woman named Nancy. She's a young widow. She has a baby. They start a new life. He's trying to forget. And then one day there's a knock on the door, and it's his wife and his children who have managed to escape and find him against all odds. And now he's married to two wives. And they're all being prosecuted for bigamy. it's really interesting because it lends itself, like, who do you choose now? Do you choose your old wife? Do you choose your new wife? Like, who do you want to be with? And I found that intriguing. It's told from, I believe it's told from the two wives' points of view and Henry's. I think it's a three point of view. Anyway, that made no sense. But it was a really, really good book. It's very interesting. The Wives of Henry Oades by Johanna Moran. And then, while this book is not really obscure, like, it was popular when it came out. And I did enjoy it. It wasn't a book that held my attention as much as some, but it definitely stands out to me. And that is the book City of Girls by Liz Gilbert, published in 2019. I love Liz Gilbert. I like following her on Instagram. I love Eat, Pray, Love. I love her thought process. This book takes place in 1940, and it's about 19-year-old Vivian. She's just been kicked out of Vassar College for lackluster performance. Her parents are very rich. They're very annoyed. So they send her off to live with this rather flamboyant aunt, Peg. She lives in this crumbly Midtown Manhattan apartment, and she runs this theater called Lily Playhouse. And while Vivian is there, she meets this whole cast of characters of these women who are actresses and singers and dancers, and she kind of learns about a whole different lifestyle from them. She makes a mistake and winds up in this scandal. Of course, it involves a man, and she has to try to figure out how to navigate that and what she's going to do, what kind of life she's going to lead, how is she going to pursue it. The scandal kind of shocked her and opened up her eyes a little bit. It was good, and it's told from the viewpoint of Vivian now as a 95-year-old looking back on her life. It was good. It was good. And it was I hate to call it a feminist book, but it really did talk about the power that women can have. And so many of these books, almost all my books that I read, have a main character of a woman who finds the power within herself. I am drawn to that kind of book. And even in my historical fiction, so many of my books that I enjoy and read have that theme going. It was a great segue into the next book because it is another story of a young girl who had to grow up quickly, who had to be resilient in the face of grief and heartache and trouble. And that is the book All the Forgiveness by Elizabeth Hardinger. It was published in 2019. It's first set in Appalachia in rural Kentucky, and the main character is 15-year-old Birdie. She lives with her mama Polly, all of her siblings. She's a farm girl who knows how to do it all. You know, boil a pig, make a pie crust, you know, chop wood, you name it, she does it. And her mother winds up dying, and Birdie has to take on that mother role. The father is pretty much non-existent, no good. He doesn't help at all. You know, he just is weak. And Birdie takes on the responsibility. And she winds up having to send her brothers to some older brothers who are already settled because she can't take care of them all. And she keeps the girls with her. And she sees the only way out is for her to get married. So she gets married and the family moves to the oil fields of Kansas. And, you know, it's a hard life. And the story is really just how she deals with the hardships and kind of learns to love herself and forgive herself for things that have happened. So it's a really good book. And I like too that it is set in a different location. You go from Appalachia to Kansas, and I like that the time period is different. I try to find books that were not all World War I and World War II, Civil War. I feel like so many historical fiction books are based in that time period. These books are not. These are all different time periods. So hopefully you can find something you like. Let's move on to the next book, which is set in a totally different time and place. And this is set in Puritan times. I believe it's in Boston, but it might not be. Yes, it is. It's Boston in 1662, and it is The Hour of the Witch by Bohjlian. It was published in 2021. So this is a young Puritan woman. Her name is Mary. She's 24. She lives in a violent marriage with a drunken man. She is the second wife of this alcoholic man. He gets into drunken rage, and at one point he decides he's mad at her, and he stabs her in the hand with this 3-pronged fork, which plays a role later on. So Mary is mad, and she does not want to be his wife anymore. It's hard to divorce in puritanical times. So, and it's also the time period when everyone is watching for devil worship, witchery, spells, and they're watching the women. And she is a woman that is more outspoken. She does not like the hypocrisy of the men in the colony. And so they glom onto that and think that she might be a witch or the devil. And then they find some objects buried in her yard, which makes them go, They think that's all part of spells that she's doing. So it's how she has to prove that she's not a witch, she's not the devil. How is she going to do that? She wants to get out of her marriage, and it's very suspenseful. There's that little bit of mystery to it. Very good book. Definitely recommend. So the next two books kind of focus on orphans. There's so many historical fiction books that have orphans as main characters, if you've noticed. So the first book is Sold on a Monday by Kristina McMorris. It's 2018. It's based on that photo. And this book actually was pretty popular, I think, at the time that it was written. It is about this struggling reporter. His name is Ellis Reed. He's looking for his big break. And one day he passes by a house that has a sign that says 2 children for sale. It's a broken down farmhouse. He asks if he can take a picture of the children and the mom. And he says he's not going to publish it. But it leads to his big break. He winds up publishing it with some really dire consequences that he was not prepared for. So it was sad. It was a sad book. It really tells the time of the Depression and what life was like for the people who lived it. And then we have The Orphan Collector by Ellen Marie Wiseman, published in 2020. You know, I love Ellen Marie Wiseman. I did not love the last book that I read, The Life She Was Given. I think that was the name of the book. Was not a fan of it. I really liked The Orphan Collector. I read it right after COVID, and the parallels were, there were a lot of parallels between the life in 1918 during the Spanish flu epidemic and COVID. Plus, this is taking place in the fall of 1918, and I remember my grandmother, who was born in 1907, telling us about when she was young in Baltimore and the Spanish flu epidemic hit and what it was like. And it was horrible. It was just as horrible as when COVID hit. So this is about a 13-year-old girl named Pia Lang. She is a German immigrant. She lives in Philadelphia in a very overcrowded, poor part. There's a lot of anti-immigration thoughts. They're not very tolerant there, and so to prove himself, her father enlists in the U.S. Army and is shipped overseas. But as the war is ending, an urgent threat arrives, which is the Spanish flu. Quarantine signs appear everywhere. The food runs out. And she has to venture alone. Her mother has died. She has to venture into the quarantined city in order to find food. And she doesn't feel safe bringing her twin baby brothers, so she leaves them behind. Also, there's another character named Bernice. She's lost in her grief. She had a baby that died during the Spanish flu. She watches Pia leave her brothers. She watches her leave the apartment without them. She decides that she is going to kidnap the babies. And so Pia winds up getting sick. She wakes up days later in a hospital. She's very afraid because she's left the babies alone. And now it's been days. Nobody knows they're there alone. She goes back to the apartment to get them, and they're missing. So now we have the story of Pia, who is trying to find the babies. And then we have Bernice, who has decided that's going to be her mission, to take orphans and children from people and turn them into true Americans. It's a really good book. It's a very good book. It takes years for her to find justice, but it has a good ending, which I like. Now, also along the lines of orphans is a book called Winter Sisters by Robin Oliveira. It was published in 2018. Now, it is book number 2, which I didn't know, in a series, maybe. It's called the Mary Sutter books. This is Mary Sutter book 1. And this is a book called My Name is Mary Sutter. And it is about a young midwife who dreams of becoming a surgeon during the Civil War. Well, this takes place... Those were the cats. This takes place in New York in 1879. An epic blizzard blows through Albany, New York. It devastates the city, and when the snow finally settles, 2 newly orphaned girls are missing. And it's up to Mary Sutter. She is going to try to find them. She's searching for the girls. And when she finally finds them, she has to fight the most powerful of all the Oh, well. 2 sisters are fighting. Huckleberry's gotten very cantankerous lately, and I don't know what her problem is. But she's fighting with her sister, and I don't know why. They're eyeing each other up at the end of the hallway, so I don't know what's going on with them. Dear Lord, if you hear screeching, that's what it is. So anyway, when Mary Sutter finally finds these girls, she has to confront the men of Albany. And as she seeks to protect the the rights of these children. This was the first time that I realized that the age of consent at that time period in New York was, I believe it was 10. And she works to get the men in Albany to see that this is wrong. It's a good book, but it was an eye-opening book. It was an eye-opening book into what was considered okay. Nothing wrong with it, you know, when it came to children. So, but it does, I mean, it does have a good ending. But anyway, that is The Winter Sisters. Got to check it out. And actually, my name is Mary Sutter. This is a really, really good historical fiction book, too. So another great mystery, it's like a historical fiction mystery, is A Grown-Up Kind of Pretty by Joshilyn Jackson, published in 2012. There's 3 women in this story. We've got Mosey, she's 15. This is the age that her family is cursed at. Her grandmother, Big, got pregnant with Mosey's mother, Liza, at that age. And then Liza got pregnant with Mosey at 15. And now Mosey is 15. She is afraid the same thing is going to happen to her, even though she doesn't have a boyfriend. She does not know how it all works. The summer that this book takes place, her mother winds up having a stroke. And Big, the grandma, decides that she's going to cut down some trees and put in an in-ground pool so that the mother, Liza, can get some water therapy. And while they're digging up the pool, they find a box. And in the box, there are infant bones. And so the giant mystery is, how did they get there? Where did they come from? Who put them there? Like, what happened in this family that was hidden for generations? It changes everything. Secrets come to light that nobody ever thought that would. It was very intriguing, a really good mystery, and a really good book that examines the family dynamics of a family that's never had any men. It's just the 3 women. So it was very good. A Grown-Up Kind of Pretty. And last but not least, another historical fiction mystery kind of book. It is The 19th Wife by David Ebershoff. It was published in 2008. It's historical fiction along with a modern murder mystery. So one part of the story is 1875. Anne Eliza Young has separated from her powerful husband, who you probably have heard of, Brigham Young, the prophet and leader of the Mormon Church. She's expelled, she's an outcast, and she embarks on a crusade to end polygamy in the United States. And while you're learning about her story, a second narrative unfolds, which is a tale of murder involving a polygamist family in modern-day Utah. So Jordan Scott is a young man. He's thrown out of his fundamentalist sect years before, but he comes back because he's trying to investigate the murder of his father, and he wants to find out the truth. And then Anne's story intertwines with Jordan's search. It's a very interesting book. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about polygamy. It was a book that I found hard to put down. Like, you just wanted to keep reading it and reading it and reading it. So those are some science fiction, historical fiction recommendations for you. Maybe some that you have not heard of, books that I have enjoyed a lot. So hopefully you find something on the list that you might want to try and enjoy. So on that note, happy reading. I'll see you on the next video.